Did David Moreno ever bring documents to your house?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you ever receive a text about your work at NIAID to your personal cell phone?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did any text about your work at NIAID that went to your personal cell phone ever become part of federal records?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you maintain a personal email account while serving as director?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you ever receive work-related communications on that Gmail account from David Moreno?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you preserve any work-related communications on that Gmail account from David Moreno?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did David Moreno ever provide you with documents outside of those two ways that would violate NIH policy for FOIA compliance?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Now let's look at two other communications. You emailed David Moreno on January 26, 2020, quote, "It is important that I speak with you tonight. Please call me at home." This is part of Exhibit 2 that you have in front of you. This email is sent the same day, the exact same day you write in an internal document, quote, "Now we know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier," unquote. Would you call the origins of COVID-19 a substantive issue?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you discuss COVID-19 origins with David Moreno on this phone call?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Now let's take a closer look at the last time you testified before Congress. This is part of what you have in front of you as Exhibit 4, which is part of the record. In June 2024, you testified to Dr. Moreno's, quote, "Was not an advisor to me on institute policy or other substantive issues. Furthermore, his office is located in a different building from that of the NIAID director," unquote. Is that still your testimony today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So today, under oath, your testimony remains that Dr. Moreno was not an advisor to you on institute policy or substantive matters.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Now, I've got Exhibit 5, which you have in front of you. On October 24, 2021, David Moreno texted you to provide information about and advocate for the controversial EcoHealth Alliance grant. You thank him and tell him that you will check the information. Would you agree that this shows an advisory relationship between David Moreno and yourself?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Would you agree that you two were discussing a substantive issue?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
If documentary evidence establishes that Dr. Moreno advised you regarding EcoHealth Alliance, COVID origins, or grant policy, then your June 2024 testimony would have been inaccurate, correct?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Is there any document in your possession today that would contradict your prior congressional testimony?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Have you deleted, destroyed, or instructed anyone to destroy records after learning Congress is investigating these matters?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Are you aware of anyone who did?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
As you know, Dr. Moreno now faces charges related to destroying records while you distance yourself from him. Is that fair to a decades-long friend?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
When is the last time you spoke to him?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
In hindsight, are you disappointed how you handled COVID? Do you have any regrets?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Dr. Fauci, I want to close with this. Here's how you impacted my family and people close to me. I have daughters with children. You can't imagine the questions they had around vaccines for their kids and themselves, and the pressure, the unbelievable pressure to make the right decision for their health. I can tell you pregnant women who worked with me were so scared because every time they went to the doctor, they were told something different about taking the vaccine. And you caused this. Imagine being a mom trying to protect their kids, or an expectant mother trying to figure out what to do. Every 3 weeks, a doctor tells you a new set of guidance on a vaccine. The haphazard information you released and pushed on the American people with little research is appalling, and why there's so much distrust in our institutions today. That trust is crucial to public health, and you, more than any person or event in my lifetime, have destroyed that trust for millions of Americans. You lied to hundreds of millions of people amid the worst public health crisis in a century. You failed to follow your own guidance. You forced people to watch their loved ones die alone over the phone. It's disgusting. You destroyed the federal government's credibility when it comes to public health. We have entire generations of Americans who, rightfully so, do not trust our institution to keep people safe because of you. This has destroyed decades of progress and lifetimes of work because you wanted to fuel your own ego and be the center of attention. What would you do differently knowing what you know today, Dr. Fauci?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
All the evidence is right here, and you still can't bring yourself to tell the truth or apologize because you received an auto-pin pardon from a staffer in the Biden White House. If we have another pandemic tomorrow, millions could die because of what you did to make Americans lose trust in their government when it comes to medicine and health care. How many families have you apologized to had to watch their loved ones die alone? You breached public trust, and now you're hiding behind a fraudulent pardon. Your legacy will not be as a man that saved America from COVID, but as a man who destroyed the public trust in America's public health institutions in exchange for 5 minutes of fame. This is how history will remember you. I yield back.
Senator Kim.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci, for coming on out in front of this committee. I know it's not what you would want. It's not what you deserve. I just want to say and start by just saying thank you to you for your service to this nation. I didn't know much about you prior to the pandemic. I came to learn about you from however many Americans did, but I also had the opportunity to talk to you and engage with you as someone who is a member of the Select Committee on the Coronavirus Crisis over in the House of Representatives. When I learned about your background, 38 years as the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, appointed by President Reagan, served under 7 presidents, 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats. I admire that greatly. I myself had a chance to serve in the executive branch, serve in government under both a Republican president and a Democratic president. And I believe that we need more of that type of work, a place where we can understand our jobs not as coming from a place of partisanship and politics, but that of just public service. And right now, I feel the hyperpartisanship growing in this country in dangerous ways. I feel it much more present here on the Hill than I did back when I served as a nonpartisan career public servant at the State Department. And I worry about it. I worry about what kind of trajectory we're on as a country and what this causes when it comes next for public service and those willing to step up for our nation. And it's not just in the attacks, but we see it brought out with the cuts to funding, to the firing of federal workers, to the demonization of their motivations people calling our public servants criminals, thinking that they are there solely to undermine others that are trying to engage. I look at it right now. It's not just that the people are being attacked, our public servants being attacked, but that it's undermining the very nature of the work of governance. These cuts to HHS funding, to NIH funding, to the grants, cuts to the researchers doing the critical work to find cures and medicines. These firing, these cuts, they're creating a chilling effect, honestly, a chilling effect for the next generation of people who might consider stepping up to serve our nation, to be the next generation.
Upon further review, I can't stand listening to these Democrats. I can't stand them listening to glazing this murderer, Fauci. Just to put this in context, folks, we're going to cut back as soon as we get to a Republican, because I got to hear Fauci. I got to hear Fauci taking the Fifth Amendment. He's a monster. He's a monster, and I'm asking the FBI and whatever, why when Fauci walks off of there today is he not cuffed? This is the problem. This is why we have a lack of urgency and a lack of intensity, the grassroots and the base. People are furious today to cut on this and see Fauci hiding behind the Fifth Amendment because he's a murdering monster, and he should die in prison. He should be in prison for the rest of his life. Where are we on this? Where's the Justice Department? Where's the FBI? Where are we on this? We've had now a year and a half to plan. This monster comes up, and on very straightforward questions, and I really want to give a hat tip to Senator Rand Paul and to the Republicans for just really straightforward, great questions, and he takes the Fifth. He's a monster. Please remember, we were banned on everywhere, to YouTube, Facebook, all of it, for our advocacy of about the stolen election being stolen, which it was. Now we know that, and also about going after Fauci. And look who was right and look who was wrong. This guy's a monster. Let's go to Neil McCabe. Our own Neil McCabe. It's not the White House day. He's up on Capitol Hill. Neil, put us in the room. What's it been like?
Yeah, it was very, very tense in the beginning because everyone was waiting to see how Dr. Fauci would react. And of course, he's taken I lost track, maybe 1,000 times he's invoked the Fifth Amendment. Of course, he has been auto-pen pardoned. Senator Johnson in the hallway told me that he sees no way of undoing or challenging the auto-penned pardon. But if you have immunity, I think
Senator Johnson's wrong. This is why the guy's taking the Fifth. Trust me, his lawyers are concerned about it. That's why he's taking the Fifth. Go ahead.
2 U.S. Code 192 basically makes it a misdemeanor failing to testify before Congress. He has no legal jeopardy, and so in effect, he's obstructing a congressional investigation, which is the point that Chairman Rand Paul made. And of course, the great drama is when Fauci's attorney, who Chairman Paul said could not sit at the table and would not be recognized to speak, David Schertler, Fauci's attorney, continued to protest, object, say that the hearing was bogus. He wanted to be recognized, and he was warned at least 3 times to be quiet and respect the proceedings because he wasn't recognized, and he was escorted out of the room. The Democrats have all asked. They haven't asked any questions. They've all just sort of given speeches because if Fauci actually answers one of the questions, go ahead.
Okay, hang on one second. You stay right there. I'm going to cut into it and go back. I think Josh Hawley is going to speak. Let's go back to the hearing.
Let's try something. What day of the week is it today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color tie are you wearing?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color is the carpet in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Let's just get one thing straight. You don't have any rights under the Fifth Amendment because you've been pardoned, as you very well know. As the Supreme Court has been clear for a century and more, Brown versus Walker, 1896, when he has been pardoned, he may not stand upon his privilege. You know that. Your lawyers sitting behind you now shifting nervously in their chairs. They know it. This isn't about the Constitution. This isn't about the law. This is about contempt. Contempt for this body and contempt for the American people. But I think I know why you're doing it. It's because you don't want to answer questions. It's because you did all kinds of terrible things. It's because during the pandemic you got rich, didn't you? You got rich while people were dying, hundreds of thousands of Americans, over 1 million in the end, and you were getting rich. And not only were you doing that, you were using federal employees with taxpayer money to apply for and solicit cash prizes for you personally. Cash prizes totaling over $1 million. You did all of that during the pandemic, didn't you? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
You remember Greg Folkers? Who was that?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Your chief of staff is the answer. Do you remember Patricia Conrad? Who was that?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
She was your personal assistant. And what were these individuals doing in the depth of the pandemic in November of 2020 when millions of Americans were suffering from COVID? What were they doing? I tell you what they're doing. Folkers was on your behalf soliciting and gathering information for a cash award. Let's look at it. We've got his email right here, right over my shoulder. Folkers says, I'm working on this nomination for the Dan David Award for Fauci. We need to beef up the COVID part. Do you have language in the can that you could share that delineates how we responded in new ways to COVID? He sends this to multiple federal employees. What was the Dan David Award? Do you remember, Doc?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
It was a $900,000 cash award. $900,000 cash award. And he got it because he used federal employees to get it. And this wasn't the only award, was it, Dr. Fauci? In fact, you applied for and received at least 8 other federal cash prizes on federal time using federal employees and federal resources. Here they are over my shoulder. Besides the Dan David Award, you've got the Partnership for Public Service, you've got the Adelson Prize, you've got the Smithsonian Award, you've got the National Academy of Medicine's Award, you've got the CDC Foundation. In fact, you turned your staff into a full-time application machine. You actually wrote to people and said, do you think maybe I'd qualify? And you got cash for all of this. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 employees, was it? In fact, you used 8 separate federal employees on federal time using federal resources to solicit cash awards. Isn't that true?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Here they are right over my shoulder. Here's all of them. The people that you use, federal employees, so that you could go and get cash money. And the most hilarious part is that you weren't content to even dragoon them into applying for all of these cash awards. You then had them go out to the ethics agencies and ethics watchdogs and demand that you be able to get the money. That's right. We've got it in your emails. Your staff and employees on federal time, using federal resources, being paid with federal dollars, are soliciting cash for you. And then they're turning around and saying to the agency, we don't want just an answer. We want to get to yes, because Fauci wants the money. He wants it. We want to get to yes, and yes takes time. This is your chief of staff again, using federal email to pressure the agency's own ethics people so that you could get money, so that you could get rich. And it violated the law, didn't it, Dr. Fauci? Didn't it? It violated the law, didn't it?
Is that a question?
It is a question. You can answer. Go ahead.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Federal law, as you very well know, prohibits the solicitation of cash awards or other personal benefits for federal employees. And it certainly prohibits using your own employees to do this. 5 CFR section 2635-205B It says it right there in black and white. You cannot use federal resources, federal dollars, federal employees, federal offices, federal email, federal time to solicit cash awards, and you did all of it. And the worst part is thousands of people were dying while you were doing it. You were supposed to be the nation's doctor, and you were playing one on TV, but this is what you were doing with your time. Isn't that true?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah, I can see why. I can certainly see why. You know what I can't quite figure out is that why you were so obsessed with it, because you're already rich. I mean, and your scheme worked here. I mean, your net worth now is north of $12 million. You got over $1 million in cash awards during COVID, during a 12-month, 24-month span during COVID. $1 million you knocked down in cash money using federal resources. Now you're worth more than $12 million. You've got a pension that in its first year paid out north of $400,000 a year. 1 million people dead, you're getting rich. 1 million people dead, you're using federal employees to get cash awards for you. 1 million people dead, and you're here taking the fifth because you don't want to admit that what really happened in all that time was a multi-month, multi-year course of self-dealing. Isn't that true, Dr. Fauci?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah, well, silence is admission. And here's the real thing. At the end of the day, it wasn't just about the money, really, was it? It was really about a power trip. I mean, through all of this, you want to be the most famous scientist in the world. You were so focused on getting every award and every drop of cash that you could, all because you wanted to be on TV. You wanted to be the sun god of science. You wanted to be the guy who was in charge of it all. You wanted to lambast Trump. You wanted to make sure that nobody else stole your spotlight. You wanted to be the guy. You had time to sit for InStyle magazine. Here's what you were doing with your time. You could sit for InStyle magazine, but you can't answer questions for the American people. You could sit for InStyle magazine, but you're here taking the fifth. You could sit for InStyle magazine and get $1 million in cash awards, but now the cat's got your tongue. I bet he does. I tell you what, here's my conclusion from all of this. This was really all about you the whole time. Somewhere along the way, you lost your way. You may have been a good public servant at one time, I don't know. But what I can tell you from reading your emails now, from looking at what you did, how you used your employees, somewhere along the line, it became all about you. You became a narcissist and a megalomaniac and a liar. And you've lied to the American people, and you've lied to this body. And you've disgraced your profession by doing it. You called yourself the most famous scientist in the world. You've done more to harm science than anybody in my lifetime. And I hope you'll go home and write that in your diary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Fetterman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fauci, I'm not here to perhaps attack you or defend or anything. It's really just more, honestly, I just want to acknowledge I have had members of my family die from COVID, and now I also grieve for people that I've met that have lost their business through the pandemic, and they'll never been the same. Now, as during the pandemic, I was the lieutenant governor, so we were in the middle of all of that maelstrom, trying to find the right balance between protect life and protect the economics and for all of it. And I'm not sure if we got it all right or wrong, but without a doubt, I can continue to question myself. But one that it's not about much more your regrets, but I have one, and that is early on that there was the theory that the virus could have emerged from the lab. And early on that became like a right-wing kinds of theory. And I thought it seemed to make sense. Now, there was a really advanced lab that was close by, and then you have this unknown virus out. So, but that became a very partisan thing. And now it seems now it's more and more emerging theory that would have come from the lab. Now, you know, I hope I think that the next time our nation's facing something like this, we are not become, as I might have been, blinded by the partisan idea that maybe the truth might come from a side that's different than you are. But I think we should really be willing to pursue truth, no matter where that may have emerged, for all of that. So, and I now cede the remain back to the chair. Thank you.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will echo Senator Johnson's comments about your opening statement, Mr. Chairman. I think it was dead on. Very, very well done. Mr. Fauci, do you know who David Schertler is?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. What does the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution say?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
No, I'm just asking you what it says.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I'm going to give the Constitution to my aide. He'll bring it over to you so you can have it for future reference. I think it's something that every American should know what the Constitution says. Do you know who wrote the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
So you're invoking a right that you don't know who wrote it or what it says. Is that correct?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Wow. All right, let me tell you who David Schertler is for the audience, because he was ejected by the chairman. He's a high-profile criminal attorney. He's represented some really great people, like Senator Bob Menendez. Maybe that's somebody who my Democrat colleagues may remember took gold bars as bribes from the Egyptians. And there's an article here in the Washington Free Beacon that talks about why you would hire a guy like David Schertler. And the comment is, if you're in deep that's who you call. Do you feel like you're in deep?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Clearly, what you think today is that somehow you're above reproach. Somehow you feel like you don't need to be treated like a normal American. Can you do me a favor in the audience and stand up if during the time of the COVID pandemic, you were called a racist for calling the virus a Wuhan virus or the China virus? If you thought the 6-foot rule was total crap, if you thought the vaccine wasn't something that you should take, if you thought it was outrageous the way the mask policy was rolled out, if you were fired from your job for not taking that vaccine, including members of the military, if you thought closing schools was catastrophically stupid, and that you thought that during these times saying these things made you somehow a lesser human being. Dr. Fauci, can you just turn around and look at the people behind you? You're not willing to do that? That's not a question. It's not a question. To your lawyer, it's not a question. It's a request. All you have to do is look up from your lawyers and look at the people who were absolutely shamed for saying what we know now to be the truth. You can't even look at them? That's a question. Are you able to look at them? You can sit down in the audience. There was a mom in Ohio during the depth of the coronavirus pandemic, decided to go to her high school football game for her son. They hadn't been out much. The kids had been learning at school, and then the school got shut down. They hadn't really gotten much out of that education. As any parent knew, that remote learning was no learning at all. But it was a Friday night. Her son wanted to go watch a buddy go play football. So they went to the stadium. They sat alone, far from everybody else, just a mom, a dad, a few kids. They didn't feel they needed to wear masks because it was stupid, because they were outside. They all live together. They're not near anybody. Dr. Fauci, do you know what happened to that mom and that family? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
They were dragged out of that stadium and arrested. Those policies were put in place because you had moronic politicians that listened to the words of a megalomaniac who was more interested in having met a Kardashian than the suffering of the American people, and that is you. Your advice to communities like that, to idiotic politicians who enforce those rules, arrested that mom for watching a football game with her own family outside. When that story broke, I said to myself, I cannot stand idly on the side and watch this happen. It was about 6 years ago today that I decided I'm going to give up my businesses, sell them all, run for office, run for the United States Senate. Here I am sitting in front of you 6 years later saying, who the do you think you were for doing that? It is a total disgrace what you did to this country. And if my Democrat colleagues are standing there defending you, I hope the voters of the United States of America watch the clips of every one of you doting on a guy who was more interested in being a celebrity than saving American people. I will make it my mission to make certain that every single one of those Democrats who did that will see that clip over and over and over again. Because there is no defense of what you did. You may have had a 50-plus year legacy of public service, but it ends in total and complete disgrace. So let me ask you an opportunity to answer one question. Will you apologize, just apologize, to the people who you harmed through your actions? Will you say, do you have the dignity to just say you're sorry?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So you won't apologize to the military members who Joe Biden summarily dismissed from the military for not taking the vaccine?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the business owners that lost their business, shattered their lives, and they'll never recover?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the moms who had to force their infant children, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, to put masks on, and what that did and how that traumatized those kids?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the family members of the people who died because they took your advice and not only got the first vaccine, but the 5, 6 other boosters that they did not need?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to that mom from Ohio for being arrested for watching a football game with her family?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So you didn't know who wrote the Fifth Amendment. It's James Madison. Lived in this town. I can only wonder what he would think of somebody like you invoking his writings to shield culpability. for the actions that you took. It's no secret why you have to hire the biggest dirtbag attorney on the planet, because of what you did. I hope you're paying him well. And I hope that one way or the other, somewhere, sometime, you answer for your crimes.
Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing today. Dr. Fauci, Americans haven't forgotten the tragic stories of people who lost loved ones during COVID and those that were denied a chance to say goodbye to their family members that were in hospitals or residing in nursing homes because of the COVID-19 protocols. Americans haven't forgotten the mandates, the adverse reactions to vaccines, the government misinformation, social media censorship, hotlines to tattle on their neighbors, the forced school closures, the tragic rise in suicides, or those businesses that were forced to close during lockdowns. Americans haven't forgotten the hundreds of billions of dollars spent by taxpayers for COVID relief, stolen by fraudsters who bought Rolls Royces and yachts. These were taxpayer dollars. Americans have lost trust in science and government after the COVID response, trust which will be incredibly difficult for us to gain back. Dr. Fauci, you said that the science was evolving and that your recommendations evolved with it. But Americans remember you as the public face of the coronavirus response. As one of the nation's most trusted voices, you urged policies you said were absolutely necessary, even when those policies came at an enormous human and economic cost. And Americans deserve answers about reports that you may have worked with others to pressure the president into adopting the slow the spread strategy, and why you later sought an unconditional pardon for crimes you may have committed dating back to 2014. Dr. Fauci, in 2022, you had a taxpayer-funded salary of $480,000 a year. You were, in fact, the highest-paid federal employee in the entire federal government, even making more than the NIH director and the President of the United States. According to now public documents, that was due in large part to your work on biodefense. Unreported is how NIAID spent over $1 billion from 2009 to 2026 in biodefense and influence of federal contracts and subcontracts. My office uncovered records on usaspending.gov that show from 2015 to 2020, NIAID paid out $515,418 in subcontracts to Harbin Veterinary Institute in Harbin, China, including $100,000 a few days after it opened a BSL-4 biolab in 2018. That very same institute was criticized for doing gain-of-function bird flu research in 2013. And yet you were funding them for years after that, sending U.S. taxpayer dollars to China. These contracts, which we also trace to NIAID, show U.S. taxpayers funded gain-of-function researchers in the Netherlands and in Wisconsin, funding the same folks whose controversial work led President Obama to pause this exact type of dangerous pandemic research. Dr. Fauci, Did you know that the NIH's billion-dollar Sears contract programs were funding gain-of-function researchers in China, the U.S., and in the Netherlands?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Dr. Fauci, Dr. Deborah Birx wrote in her book that you and President Obama's former CDC director were at a Saturday, March 14th, yes, 2020 meeting at her home 2 days before the president announced his 15 days to slow the spread effort. Your now released diary said the meeting was a week before that. Dr. Birx said you all were trying to trap the president into having no other options. She wrote, your plan was to, quote, block any of the president's escape routes. So, quote, he'd have no choice but to agree to our flatten the curve measures. Yes or no, Dr. Fauci, did you try to block or trap President Trump into the slow the spread, flatten the curve measures in March 2020?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
When the COVID-19 virus broke out in Wuhan, China, you, Dr. Fauci, knew pretty much right away that NIH had funded Chinese labs, including those doing coronavirus research. There's email traffic from early January 2020 where your staff was flagging for you that NIH funded coronavirus research at the Wuhan lab through EcoHealth Alliance. Yet few Americans knew we funded the Wuhan lab because the funding went through a sub-award and was not reported to the public database like usaspending.gov as it should have been. Also, EcoHealth violated federal law by failing to report in its research papers how much taxpayer funding it spent on that research. At my request, the Government Accountability Office helped track down that $1.4 million of U.S. taxpayer money that was sent to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, both by you, Dr. Fauci, and through USAID. But first, it passed through EcoHealth Alliance, which I helped to get defunded through the NDAA. Dr. Fauci, did you intentionally use subaward funding to obscure NIH funding of Chinese biolabs and coronavirus research?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
NIAID awarded multi-million-dollar grants to a number of scientists shortly after they wrote publicly in the Proximal Origins paper that the COVID virus likely came from nature. Though documents Chairman Paul released last week show in private, those same scientists were much more open to the virus being from a lab. In 2023, Representative Jordan insinuated that you basically gave a $9 million bribe in the form of an NIH grant to NIH-funded virologists to say the virus likely was from nature. Dr. Fauci, yes or no, did you reward the Proximal Origin authors by giving them NIAID grants or contracts?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Dr. Fauci, we have learned that U.S. coronavirus researchers at UNC shipped, quote, humanized or transgenic mice to China by around 2017 for use in their dangerous coronavirus work. Under your NIAID coronavirus, researchers also used aborted baby body parts in mice research, and taxpayers paid for them to do that. NIH-funded coronavirus researcher Dr. Ralph Barrick and his colleagues at UNC put parts of livers, thymuses, and chunks of human fetal lung that they got from aborted, almost 5-month-old human babies. They put those parts in their research mice. They disgustingly named them BLT mice and wrote they had created a, quote, sandwich of aborted body parts in the mice. Get it, folks? BLT. A BLT sandwich. Your RML lab employees in Montana also ordered and used aborted baby body parts in their taxpayer-funded research. And emails show how they plan to use those mice for post-COVID work. NIH funded putting aborted babies' fingers and scalps off the heads of aborted babies and putting them into the backs of research mice. The scalps later grew fine baby hair in the mice. They even included those disgusting photos in their research paper that you funded. Not all of those were research on coronaviruses, but some were. Thankfully, the current NIH director has said no more of this. Dr. Fauci, yes or no? Do you think that human aborted parts should be put into mice for coronavirus research?
The advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Mr. Chairman, would you direct the witness to answer the questions that we have been asking?
He probably would if he was here, but I can direct it. But no, I think we understand his answer.
We do understand that. Americans are asking for accountability, Dr. Fauci, and your silence is very telling. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm the most junior member of the Senate here, showing from where I sit. I just got here last year. Many of you may remember I was the Attorney General in Florida who fought back against the lockdowns, the school closures, the church closures, everything to embrace sanity and science. We fought back. We got ridiculed for it. And we didn't just call people names. We actually impaneled a grand jury of people of all walks of life, all political persuasions. So that's how I came here, fighting for a free state amongst states that had locked their own people down. We are now called the Free State of Florida. And I believe our responsibility here is to make sure that government remembers the people are our bosses, that we report to them, that we're accountable to them. Government shouldn't operate for itself. Government operates on behalf of and for the American people. And anytime we get close to reporting back to our bosses about what government has done or how it's been abused or how individuals that are employed by the government had acted in their own self-interest or against the interests of the American people, every time we get close, if we start uncovering outrageous fraud, we'll have a hearing, and the tactics have been to not show up. So you'll have all of us over here trying to drill down on why we've been giving money that actually works against American citizens, and no one shows up. Today well, nobody's here at the moment. Today there seems to be a different tactic. Today we have Democrats showing up and trying to spin why we shouldn't even be having this hearing to report back to our bosses. As one said, today's hearing does damage. It will deter others from public service. Another said, this hearing is designed to entrap you. Another said, one fell all over himself flattering you, thanking you for your service multiple times, quoting man in the arena. Another said that we are demeaning first responders. And today is a sad play in a repeated playbook. Or we're going after one man. I mean, all of their time was used on why we should not be having the hearing to report back to our bosses and give the people accountability. So I would like to talk about that because I believe that the trust the American people place in our public health institutions and what happened to that trust during COVID is important. Because in a public health emergency, they are asked to make extraordinary sacrifices based on advice given to them by the government that is supposed to be working for them. And for that system to work, the public has to be able to trust the people giving them instructions. That trust depends on candor. Would you agree with that, Dr. Fauci?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
And when the evidence is uncertain, officials need to say so. When recommendations are based on assumptions rather than hard data, they need to say so. And when they get something wrong, they need to own it. And when the trust is lost and the consequences extend far beyond any single pandemic, the next time public health officials genuinely need Americans to listen, millions of people may simply ignore them or not believe them. And Dr. Fauci, you were undeniably the face of the federal government's COVID response. You said so yourself in your diary. You said it's not hyperbole to say, I've become the most famous and talked about person in the country. So I want to understand how we got here. Let's start at the beginning. On March 8th, 2020, you appeared on 60 Minutes to discuss the spread of COVID-19. You were specifically asked to clear up the confusion and misinformation surrounding masks. You told the American people, right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with a mask. The interviewer immediately stopped you and said, are you sure of it? Because people are listening really closely to this. And instead of walking back or qualifying your statement in any way, you doubled down. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little better. It might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think it is. And often there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with their masks. They keep touching their face. Just a few weeks later, the CDC released its guidance recommending that Americans wear masks in public. You were asked to explain your original recommendation. You emphasized a very different consideration. You said, well, back then, the critical issue was to save the masks for the people who really needed them because it was felt there was a shortage of masks. So I want everybody to sit with that. The critical issue driving your initial recommendation to the American public was scarcity, logistics, not medical evidence. So when you told the American people there was no reason to wear a mask, what was your principal objective? Giving them an honest assessment of the medical evidence or discouraging them from consuming a scarce supply of masks?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Well, unfortunately, that was just the beginning of a broader pattern. Let's talk about the 6-foot distancing rule. In April 5th, 2020, interview on CBS said, every time I get to that podium in the White House briefing room, I always essentially plead with people. Please take a look at those very simple guidelines of physical separation. And they're very, very clear. Physically separate 6 feet away. Yet when Congress finally asked you in 2024 what science supported that evidence, 6-foot distance rule for COVID, you admitted you were not aware of any studies supporting it. Incredibly, you said the 6-foot rule sort of just appeared and described it as an empiric decision that wasn't based on data. That rule had real consequences. Schools didn't open back up. Businesses didn't open back up. Churches didn't open back up. I could go on and on and on. And Americans were kept physically separated from one another during the most difficult moments of their lives. Many lost loved ones during that time. So, Dr. Fauci, did you have any evidence to support a 6-foot separation rule when you gave that advice to Americans?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
All right, well, let's look at the lockdowns then. By 2022, the consequences of prolonged COVID lockdowns on our children were clear, from delayed development to social isolation, which is probably why you were asked in July 2022 whether you would recommend locking down schools again. And you said, first of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down. But now we have your diary. And it tells a very different story from the one you told the public. And I will quote, I spoke with Bill de Blasio, the mayor of NYC, and convinced him based on what I was saying publicly in my conversation tonight to close the NYC schools. He had already decided based on what I was saying on TV. I went on to tell him he should close the bars and restaurants in NYC, and he said he would do this based on my recommendation. You even said that you told the president we should shut the whole country down. So Dr. Fauci, how do you square telling the American people publicly that you didn't recommend locking anything down with your own diary entry kept on federal government equipment saying that your recommendation is what convinced the mayor and the president to lock things down?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Now, I just want to make clear that when in Florida, we were pleading with people to give us advice based on scientific evidence, that we were getting these conflicting statements by you that didn't match scientific data. And in fact, when we impaneled a grand jury, the grand jury's conclusion, not surprising to anyone, and by the way, we're still the only state to have impaneled a grand jury. I was the only attorney general to do this. We did this in 2023. That conclusion was the lockdown, mask, and social distancing advice ministered by federal agencies and implemented by certain local, state, and federal agencies was not based on the best available scientific data. In fact, many recommendations and their accompanying mandates departed significantly from available research. Again, people from all walks of life, all political persuasions, that is what they found. And yet, during that time, while you were giving those statements, knowing there was no scientific basis for it, and we know now you knew it because we have your diary entries, you called the governor that I worked with to fight to keep Washington and DC out of our state so that we could indeed respect the rights of our citizens. You called our governor, Governor DeSantis, and I'm going to quote this so I get it right out of your journals, a total jerk, that he is a complete disgrace, that he is blocking local authorities from mandating masks in various locations, including schools. And you were very concerned and upset that we were actively, and I'm going to quote, criticizing you, and we talked virtually every day about being wrong on everything. And what is astounding is that you wrote you feared because of that, because we were questioning our government, because we were fighting back for the truth from our government, from scientifically based recommendations, because we were pushing for that. You said you feared that our democracy is in dire danger. Thank goodness we have people up here that I work with that understand our role, which is to report to our bosses, the people, because they are in charge. Calling for our government to be honest with us and transparent with us and accountable to us, that is a democracy. What you did is the opposite. And I cannot believe I have to explain this to someone who represented our government and some of the most important issues for so long. And before I conclude, if I can just put up our pardon. This is the pardon you have heard so much about. And Dr. Fauci, the only other person that got a pardon like this, I believe, had a last name of Biden. This pardon goes back to, and if you'll see, January the 1st of 2014. Did you talk to President Biden and ask for this pardon?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Who did you talk to in the White House about this pardon?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you specifically ask that it be dated back to the beginning of 2014?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you do that so that you would be given immunity going back to the beginning of 2014?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I'm just very interested why it was this date. Did it have anything to do with the fact that 2014 was also the year that the NIAID or NIH began funding EcoHealth Alliance's Understanding the Risk of Bat Coronavirus Emergence grant?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
And this is the same grant that funded the work on bat coronaviruses at the Wuhan Institute on Virology. Millions of Americans are questioning what happened during COVID, why we were given misleading information, misleading advice, why you gave conflicting statements based on, I guess, how you were feeling that day. And Americans, rightfully, we lost over 1 million Americans. They should be insulted when the Democrats insult our chair that he's doing this because he is on an obsessive mission to go after one man. Could his obsessive mission be to find out why 1 million Americans died and who might be responsible for that and where that started? Could that be his mission, Dr. Fauci?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
And after everything we have just walked through, can you sit here today and tell the American people, our bosses, that you bear no responsibility for their collapse in trust of their government?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Time has expired. We're going to do another quick round for those who remain, about 5 minutes. Any questions that haven't come up that are pressing? Let's try not to go over territory that's already been done. I'll begin by asking unanimous consent to insert into the record documents show that the CIA transferred funds to NIAID through interagency agreement. Hearing no objection, so ordered. We had hoped to hear testimony from Anthony Fauci today. We haven't, but I think it's important that we do hear from him. So we will have a video we'll play in a moment. For years, Anthony Fauci has been the public face of saying this in all likelihood came from nature. He kept saying, it's the marketplace, it's the marketplace, it's the marketplace. He's been saying that on television up until recently. But what we find is that what he was saying in public is different than what he was saying in private. In January, in private, he wrote that looks like the wet market was a super spreader event. It didn't originate there. We know that some of the earliest deaths and sickness came from somewhere else. But then for years and years, we got dishonesty. So let's play the video so we can see a little juxtaposition of the problem we're dealing with.
Fauci's journal entries contradict what he said publicly about the origins of COVID-19. Fauci admitted in January 2020 that the initial outbreak of COVID did not occur at a wet market.
Take a really good look at the animal-human interface and the fact that animals from the wild are being brought into wet markets. You have animals that come out of the wild that are sold at these open, what they call them, wet markets. Wet markets, where you bring animals in from the wild who have these viruses. The wet markets in Asia, where people bring animals from the forest into market. There are wet markets in Wuhan that are ample opportunity for a virus to jump from an animal. The origin was from a bat to an intermediate host to a human, very likely in a wet market. And those animals should not have been in the Wuhan market. They knew that those animals should not have been in the market, and they immediately cleaned out the market, put restrictions on the kinds of animals that come into these wet markets. I think they should shut down those things right away. I mean, it boggles my mind.
So repeatedly saying in public something different than what he believed in private. Now, this is interesting because, the first SARS outbreak in 2003 was traced to a wet market, to animals there. But interestingly, they had evidence. They had evidence that the animals had the disease. They also had evidence that the handlers had a disproportionately high number of antibodies to the disease. So there was evidence, and the evidence was presented. So when this came out, the same thing happened again. They did look at the wet market. They looked at the wet market and tested, I think, 80,000 animals and didn't find any animals that had COVID-19. When they did find COVID-19 in trace samples there, they found that the DNA or the RNA was consistent with human spread. This was known not later on, didn't take years to develop, was known in January of 2020. And so Dr. Fauci says privately he knows it didn't come from the wet market, but as you saw, those were over a multi-year period. One of the other discussions I've had with Dr. Fauci over the years about natural immunity. So most infections, you get a degree of immunity, not perfect, some fairly perfect. Smallpox, you just don't get again. George Washington knew this. He had his wife get vaccinated, but he didn't because he'd already had smallpox. But there's one particular story that a man came up to me who'd lost his wife to COVID. He said, we all got it. We all got sick, and my wife ended up getting sick enough to go to the hospital. But we'd recovered 2 weeks. She was still alive. 2 to 3 weeks later, we'd all recovered, and they wouldn't let us be with her. And to this day, it's one of the saddest things. And it just, I think all of us should think about this. They were not allowed to visit their mom. He wasn't allowed to visit his wife in the hospital. But based on this misunderstanding of natural immunity, that for some reason 2 weeks later they were a problem. But this was all promulgated by you. We had the workers in the the meat factories. They were essential. They had to keep working. Most of them got COVID. They got it in the first couple of weeks. Most of them were younger. The reassurance should have come from public health. The reassurance should have said, congratulations, you've recovered. It also should be acknowledged. What's the number one thing we can do if we get another pandemic? Before we have a vaccine, before we have monoclonal antibodies, it would be to utilize natural immunity. So instead of the advice you were giving to Cuomo and others in New York that led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people or tens of thousands of people, you could have been saying, well, maybe the nurses taking care of the elderly should be people who are 2 weeks out from COVID infection. We could have used natural immunity as somewhat of a block of protection. Imperfect, but the only protection we had and the only thing we could have done. Instead, the nursing homes were seated with people who had COVID. So I think the discussion of natural immunity is one where there wasn't sufficient honesty, humility, there wasn't enough presentation to encourage people. That was the only encouraging thing we had for a while is you've got it. You're a very, very, if not impossible, close to impossible chance that you'll die if you get it again. Everybody could have been reassured. Nobody was reassured. It's like, well, we don't know. We just don't quite understand natural immunity. My favorite quote from that is from Martin Kulldorff from Harvard. You called him one of the people that you had to take down, the fringe epidemiologist, which I've never ever heard a scientist call another scientist that. But he jokingly said on Twitter, he said, yeah, we knew about natural immunity from 486 BC, from the time of the Athenian plague. We lost all knowledge of it in 2020. The good news is it's slowly coming back. 24 to 2025, we're beginning to understand what natural immunity is again. Not something perfect, but a useful tool that could have been used, but also something that could have helped people by telling the public, my goodness, you're not going to die now. You have a chance. If you've already had it and you're 85 years old and you're at risk for it and you're wanting to feed your wife and they're telling you to wear 4 masks and not be around your wife when you've already had it, it made no sense. I visited with a man whose mom was 83 and she was dying from COVID. They go to the hospital in Orange County. They won't admit her to the hospital till she's vaccinated because we have a policy that everybody in the hospital must be vaccinated. She's got COVID and they wanted to vaccinate her again. At one point in time, the CDC understood this. They told people don't get vaccinated if you've had COVID within 3 months. Why? Because it may give you a heightened immune response when you've already got a heightened immune response. But giving a person very sick, and many of the people who died from COVID died from sort of this storm of response, this immune storm, the answer wouldn't be try to stir up their immune response more by giving them a vaccine. The answer was actually steroids, and good old-fashioned steroids, 37% reduction in death. It turned out to be way more valuable than remdesivir, way more valuable than any of the other treatments, but I don't remember ever hearing a complimentary word on natural immunity or steroids or anything else. And, I wish we could have done more today. I would have been willing to accept an apology today. I'm sorry sorry, I made mistakes. We all made mistakes. And, at the time, I thought the gain of function research was, the risks of it were worth the benefits. But I've reassessed since 15 million people died. People say, well, gosh, these things never happen. We know it happened in 1977. We know with 100% certainty a virus escaped. In 1977, there's something called the Russian flu. Nobody's exactly positive how it got out. But when they sequenced it, they found out that a flu in 1977 had exactly the same RNA as a 1954 one that they had in the lab and they had created a vaccine for. In fact, turns out anybody born before 1954 was immune, and the only people who got it were people who had been born between 1954 and 1977. But it was identical. The genetic sequence was identical to this vaccine or the virus from 1954, and that doesn't happen because these respiratory viruses are always mutating. To be identical means it had to have leaked from the lab, proof positive that it had. So we know this happens. An author by the name of Young wrote a book and said there was 1,200 cases of significant accidents that have occurred. We knew all of this, and yet it was completely discounted because I think you were worried that if it was seen that you funded dangerous research that started the pandemic, you'd get blamed. And it was a concerted effort. It wasn't just you. Anybody associated with the funding decided we needed to protect ourselves. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that we lost knowledge of natural immunity. I didn't. Dr. Fauci did. I suppose I had an asymptomatic case of COVID because of the very faulty PCR test. I never got vaccinated or injected. There's no way I would have done that because I found out enough about the mRNA gene therapy. But you also brought up the issue of hospital protocols. I'm going to be holding a public event on hospital protocols. We've already received a couple hundred testimonies. They are heart-wrenching. They are heart-wrenching. Here's an excerpt from the testimony of a staff surgeon, very experienced, doctor for decades, at Providence Regional Medical Center, Everett, Washington. Quote, after our hospital was given remdesivir by the CDC, we were provided misleading/inaccurate information about the drug biomedical leadership. When I had a young trauma patient who was a perfect candidate for remdesivir, the infectious disease doctor on call told me to not give it to her because, quote, she seemed like a nice girl. He concludes it was known early the remdesivir kills. As I said, nurses referred to it as run, death is near. So again, I've always been, it never made sense to me that we put all of our eggs in the experimental gene therapy. If you knew anything about it, you would have avoided it like a plague. And we didn't. We sabotaged early treatment. But the only treatment we really approved, monoclonal antibodies, which I think basically worked pretty well, but those weren't particularly available. They were denied an awful lot of patients. It was all remdesivir. Based on a study that the NIH changed the endpoint from mortality, because it had no impact on mortality, to days of recovery. A drug that the WHO recommended against its use in COVID in November of 2020, but a drug that cost over $3,000 for a course of treatment, versus things like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, who even Dr. Fauci, I should have got that one out because I want to take this time to enter things in the record, said, we need to have a very tight protocol on remdesivir because it's unknown, but hydroxychloroquine, that's approved, some side effects, but we have a long history of it. Let's put up my latest chart. Again, I was tracking adverse events on the experimental injection, but I use this chart as a comparison. So you've got ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. These are average, again, AVAERS doesn't improve causation, but there's correlation. It's there for a safety signal. So ivermectin, over 30 years of FDA reports, 17 deaths per year. Hydroxychloroquine, over 38 years of reporting, 142 deaths per year. Remdesivir, over 5.5 years, 546 deaths per year. The COVID injection, almost 7,000 deaths per year. Which is safest? What did the FDA freak us out about ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, when they turned a complete blind's eye toward the injection's injury? So I want to enter the quote from the surgeon. By the way, here's the answer. Cheryl Atkinson in an interview said that when it comes to money, we check financial ties among experts on the government panel devising coronavirus treatment guidelines, which had the effect of dialing back hydroxychloroquine use and giving an edge to remdesivir. We found the 11 members reporting links to a drug company, 9 of them named relationships to remdesivir's maker, Gilead. 7 more, including 2 of the committee leaders, have ties to Gilead beyond the 11 months they had to disclose. 2 were on Gilead's advisory board, others were paid consultants or received research support and honoraria. By the way, within the study, I think one of the study participants was an employee of Gilead. A bunch also had conflicts with Gilead. So, gee, I wonder why. You know, there are conflicts of interest. Gilead made billions of dollars off of remdesivir and people died. In terms of ignoring safety signals, you can probably put that down now. This has come to light. This is Dr. Drew Weissman, who got the Nobel Prize for the mRNA platform. He wrote to Dr. Fauci on February 8th of 2020. Tony, I wanted to alert you to some new data we generated with our mRNA LNP vaccine. Now, it was a higher fold dose, but that mRNA LNP go to the placenta and fetus measured by translation of the mRNA and cause of immune response in the amniotic fluid. So that same day, Dr. Fauci responds, it'd be interesting to see what human dose levels given intramuscular do. So about a month later, Dr. Weissman replies, he said, we still have some concerns over the data after they tested it IM. Now, again, there's more documentation in terms of the FDA blew it off. It's like, don't worry about that. That was the whole thing. That's what Peter Marks did when he was shown that his algorithm was going to mask safety signals. The last thing I want to enter in the record here is, and I want to make the point, you know, why is this important? That they buried the treatment of severely injection injured. The fact that we haven't acknowledged these injection injuries, these people can't get treatment. They're being gaslit by their doctors. So it's all in your head. The rate of the injection injured of suicides is increasing because they've given up hope, because our medical establishment and federal health agencies completely failed them, failing to acknowledge it. So again, Dr. Nath was diagnosing and treating injection injured in March of 2021. This concerned people. So you had Dr. Walter Koroshitz, writes Dr. Fauci. One of the points he made, there's been a steady, slow stream of reports to me of post-vaccination neurological conditions. Dr. Nath has been collecting a bunch. He has reports sent out to publish. Well, that alarmed everybody. Boy, you can't let the public know what's actually happening. You can't actually let the public know what the science is showing. So on April 29th, a email from Francis Collins, head of NIH, to Dr. Koroshitz, says, I find this approach troubling and will have the main consequence of feeding vaccine hesitancy and social media overreaction. Then Dr. Lawrence Tabak writes to Francis Collins, I don't understand why Walter does not shut this thing down. Why don't you shut down Dr. Nath, who's actually treating injection injured? Why? Because of vaccine hesitancy. And because we haven't acknowledged that, and the reason I've been advocating for this is because I know the injection injured. I know people who lost loved ones within days of the injection. And we've turned our backs on them. They deserve acknowledgement. They deserve to be heard, seen, and believed so they can get treatment. I also know the doctors whose careers were destroyed because you denigrated things like ivermectin and denied ivermectin to people in hospitals who got their kidneys knocked out by the remdesivir but got put on ventilators, never got to hug their loved ones goodbye because of those hospital protocols. That's what your science did to people. So, Dr. Fauci, my only question is, based on your lack of testimony here today, based quite honestly on our investigation into the cover-up of safety signals and injection injuries, we have issued letters to a number of former FDA officials to come in for transcribed interviews. You will be getting a letter today asking for a volunteer transcribed interview. So I'd be asking, will you comply or will I have to subpoena you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Expecting a subpoena. Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Dr. Fauci, did you personally receive any royalty payments connected to COVID-related intellectual property?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Given that NIH receives royalty payments from certain pharmaceutical companies, why would any American believe these financial ties did not influence decisions about which treatments were promoted or restricted?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Why doesn't NIAID publicly disclose these payments?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you partner with Bill Gates on global health initiatives or vaccines?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
How much did Bill Gates entities provide in funding to NIAID collectively since 2005?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
To your knowledge, did Bill Gates partner with China on sensitive research?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Specifically, dual-use research such as countermeasures or gain of function?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Do you know if Bill Gates' entities partnered with U.S. government classified programs?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Do you know if Bill Gates maintains an active national security clearance?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you advocate or request for Bill Gates to receive a security clearance?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Do you have any knowledge that NIAID or NIH through HHS sponsored or requested a security clearance for Bill Gates?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Around 2010, my understanding is that the government shifted its approach to biodefense countermeasure research. Did NIAID, under your leadership, partner with the Obama White House or any other U.S. government classified entities on sensitive countermeasures research?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did your office take steps to drive biological research investments?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What was private industry's take on the type of research in the 2010 timeframe and before?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Was it considered too dangerous to conduct and industry was hesitant to take this on and invest in?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Why did you take steps to mature the government's approach to biodefense?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Were there any specific lines of effort or actions you felt were needed during this time to improve the research development and fielding model?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
How was dual use and gain of function incorporated or accounted for in maturing biodefense countermeasures?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you ever discuss moving gain of function countermeasures research out of government space to private industry space?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
How were these private organizations regulated through government oversight while conducting risky research, including gain of function or gene editing technology?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did the Obama White House or any government entities take steps to inject funding into private industry?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
How do you ensure that our national security and public health is protected when private organizations work with foreign countries of concern and have the no government oversight, such as the Eco Health Alliance research grant you funded in a CCP military lab?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Given the culture of the pay to play at NIAID, did you or anyone acting on your behalf make any payment or enter any arrangement in any way or fashion to secure influence the broad pardon you received from President Biden?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the Department of Energy that confirms during Anthony Fauci's tenure that Bill Gates was given Q security clearance from 2014 to 2021. Without objection, that will be entered into the record. I'd also ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the contents of the folder of authorities provided to Dr. Fauci, including the pardon. Let's be clear today, what we've seen. I really did want to hear from Dr. Fauci. I wanted to hear perhaps an apology, perhaps some semblance of being sorry for what happened or that judgment errors were made. We didn't hear any of that. But he was subpoenaed here to testify, refused to answer any questions, even after being directed by the chair and being advised of the law requiring him to do so. He has cited a privilege that is unsupported because of his blanket pardon and because he waived the privilege by testifying at the start. I'm going to give you one more opportunity to comply with the law, limited to the period of your pardon. At any point between January 1st, 2014 and January 19th, 2025, did you destroy any federal record or tell anyone else to?
Under the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Given that you have a unlimited presidential pardon, what is your specific objection that you are making?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
My question was limited to the period of your pardon only. I find your objection unsupported and direct you to answer the question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Because you refuse to answer, citing a privilege that is unsupported because of your pardon, and after being denied to do so, this committee has scheduled a vote next week on a resolution certifying your contempt. I think we have another question or two from Senator Langford.
Mr. Chairman, really this is a question for you, and it's a question to try to figure out how do we get a good answer on this, because clearly Dr. Fauci's attorneys are saying that he has a Fifth Amendment right. We've also subpoenaed him to be able to compel his testimony to be able to be here. I happen to be in the committee. We were also dealing with Lois Lerner. Lois Lerner came and testified, gave an opening statement, and then took the Fifth Amendment. The committee then held her in contempt for that, saying you can't do both. You can't both testify and say I'm not going to answer questions. So the parliamentary question that I think we've got to be able to deal with is this consistent with Lois Lerner? What she also did when she came before Congress, gave an opening statement, testimony, so made a statement, and then refused to answer questions. Are we dealing with the same issue here where someone is you can't make a statement and say I'm not going to make statements at the same time?
I think it's a very good question. I think that's something all of us will examine over next week. We're going to have a vote next week on contempt. I think there's another legal question that the courts may have to decide upon, and that is whether or not a presidential pardon that offers you complete immunity, that you can still claim that you need protection from immunity when you've been protected. Because Dr. Fauci isn't liable for anything as long as he tells the truth. Even if he admits that he destroyed records on a routine basis. His assistant said she destroyed a ton of emails. I think it was a routine thing. I think he destroyed throughout his career there probably thousands of emails. Even if he did that, as long as he answered truthfully, yes, I did. I didn't think that was important. I made a mistake. He can't be prosecuted for it. Many of the things are outside the statute of limitations as well. All he had to do today if he wanted to testify was be honest. As long as he was honest, even about committing a crime, he would have no jeopardy. But I think the pardon has given him more immunity than most people would ever get. Like if you offer a witness immunity in exchange for testimony, he has blanket immunity. The president gave him blanket immunity for virtually anything he could have possibly done, while at NIH. So I think we all have to individually answer this question. We welcome you to be part of helping us figure out the question, but there will be a vote, at least right now, there will be planned to be a vote next week on contempt.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Today will be the capstone to Anthony Fauci's 40 years of abuse of power at NIH. In the end, must imagine Fauci believes he got away with it. But still, late at night, even the guilty must become anxious, rerunning the scenarios through his mind, wondering, latching on to lingering doubts, and worrying. Did his actions lead to the largest man-made plague in human history? Are the millions dead the result of his experiments or experiments that he approved that increased the pathogenicity of deadly viruses? History will judge, but the facts, as we now know them, paint a sordid tale of dishonesty, misjudgment, and ultimately the hubris, the likes of which the world has rarely seen. If everyone will remain seated for a few minutes, we're going to let Dr. Fauci exit. Thank you.
Dr. Fauci, say hi to Vincent Munster for me.
Okay, historic hearing. Kind of asked the question, why wasn't this done a while ago? But hey, it's done, and we got Neil McCabe there. They killed it for dramatic purposes. Senate, maybe we should have kept it, but I'm sure the deep state's in session. Okay. Let me go to Neil McCabe that is there. First off, jaw-dropping. And Davis is going to come up. He's either got a pardon or he doesn't. And they compel testimony. I don't know. I went to Danbury for this issue. But Fauci ought to burn in the deepest pit of hell. We got to be very smart about this. I think people too, and I hope this rejuvenates some urgency. What do you think Mandani and this crowd, or Ossoff or Newsom or any of these nutcases on the left, or what happens in when Jamie Raskin takes charge here? I understand things are not perfect. I understand there's a lot of things that people are not happy with. I understand that. We're not happy here. But if you didn't have Trump, you wouldn't have a country. And right now, you got to go back to that, and you can see what's going to happen. The Faucis of the world are going to be in charge. And I realized that they were, oftentimes empowered by those around us, but you got to cut to the heart of it. We can never allow those people to be back in charge. Also, we haven't eviscerated enough the guilty over in the deep state medical and scientific apparatus. Neil McCabe, you were in the room from the beginning, and we're going to try to do it in this evening, and tomorrow we're going to try to mash some of this together for the dramatic context of it, because it's quite dramatic and very important, and must be remembered. It must be acted on. I was actually talking to people, maybe let's say in some levels of authority, like, why are we not impaneling a grand? First off, why is this guy not in handcuffs being perp walked out after this? Number two, why are we not impaneling a grand jury this afternoon in maybe one of these cities that he destroyed, which is like a lot of them? Neil McCabe, you were there. Thoughts?
Well, we've talked about the fact that Jay Clayton was fast-tracked for confirmation. He was confirmed by the Senate yesterday. And, a lot of times there's problems with nominations, but not for Jay Clayton. I'll tell you someone else who was fast-tracked, and that was Judge Jeanine Pirro, because my boss, Ed Martin, was unacceptable to the Republican leadership. I'll tell you, if Ed Martin was the U.S. attorney in D.C., people would be in cuffs. But that's neither here nor there. He's in another business now.
It's not here. No. Hang on. It's the heart of it. Ed Martin was getting stuff done. Bill Pulte. These are heroes. Are they? They got some rough edges. Yes. Is it a little unvarnished? Yes. Is it always played by the Marquis of Queensberry's rules? I don't know. Most of the time. But that's what we're in. We're in a revolutionary time. These people are radicals. Look at Fauci. Look at what you just heard. He's the greatest we ever had. He and Collins. He's a flat-out, stone-cold murderer. And yet we play all these games. Hang over a second, Neil. You stay right there. I just want to get Mike Davis in here for a second. Neil McCabe is outside the Capitol. He was there for this historic hearing. Mike Davis. Mike, I'm totally confused here, Viceroy. If he's got an auto pen pardon from a guy that's senile, And Jeff Clark, we're going to get Jeff Clark up. Jeff Clark has got the most unbelievable analysis of this interview, as only Clark can do, because you know how smart Clark is, Davis. Viceroy, please help me out here. How can he take the Fifth Amendment if he's got a pardon? He's either got one or the other. Either got a pardon or you can take the Fifth Amendment. Help me. I'm just a simple Mick. Help me out here, sir.
You're exactly right, Steve. Remember this, Tony Fauci funded COVID's birth in the Wuhan lab. He lied about it. He covered it up. COVID caused millions of deaths, trillions in lost treasure. Years of our lives were lost to misery. Kids learning suffered tremendously, particularly poor minority kids who don't have the resources like others to weather the COVID storm. They were abused. They were neglected. They're already behind in life. And then you have this monster, Tony Fauci, lying about how lethal COVID is. So we have our world shut down, making up the 6-foot rule, making up the mask mandate. He was just pulling this so-called science out of thin air. And when any of the scientists or others questioned him, he had them censored, he had them fired, he had them canceled. This guy is a monster, right? And that's why he had to get his Biden pardon. So we come to today, he either has that Biden pardon and he's not subject to criminal liability for truthfully testifying today, and he refused. He pled the Fifth illegally. So therefore, Rand Paul should hold him in contempt of Congress. They should refer him to the Trump Justice Department. He should face criminal contempt charges. He should face obstruction charges, obstruction of a congressional proceeding. Alternatively, if he didn't take that pardon, if he didn't accept the pardon from Biden, he should face charges for his crimes against humanity, including mass murder of millions of people. This guy, there are very few people in the history of this world who are as evil as Tony Fauci.
I 1,000% agree with you. We're going to go to the Gagland for a moment. I want to go to that. I'm going to get you back on about this. I got to ask you, though, real quickly. Todd Blanche, you got President Trump's best friend. Remember, we spent 3 months down in Texas on this thing and with Paxton. President Trump's best friend, John Cornyn, remember that? His best friend is now holding up, even coming to a committee for a vote, unless he sees full documentation and he signs off on the contract about the weaponization, just up in President Trump's face. Is there an alternative? I mean, why are we acting like a supplicant to John Cornyn? Right? We ought to be stripping him of everything. Why are we acting as a supplicant? As hard as everything is there an alternative for Todd Blanche to say, screw it right now, and he goes back as a special government, whatever, and we get through the midterms, and then we come back after we hold the Senate and get rid of Cornyn and crush these guys and just confirm him then, sir?
Look, I would say this. I worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I handled nominations as the chief counsel for nominations. I worked with Cornyn. I would say to John Cornyn, I don't think that he is going to tank a president's attorney general pick, including an attorney general pick of a president of his own party. I think they're going to get this resolved. I think cooler heads are going to prevail between now and the committee vote on Thursday, and Todd Blanche will be confirmed by August, on or before August 5th. And so John Cornyn will come to the right result here because he knows that Todd Blanche is extremely qualified. John Cornyn voted for Todd Blanche to be the deputy attorney general. By statute, the deputy attorney general has all of the powers, almost all of the powers as the attorney general. Todd Blanche has been a federal prosecutor. He's been a big law partner. He put that all on the line to defend President Trump against the unprecedented Republican lawfare. Todd Blanche has done a great job as the deputy attorney general and the acting attorney general. I think that we're going to let cooler heads prevail here, and Todd will get confirmed.
As you know, we're not cooler heads here in the war room. That's why we bring you in, Viceroy. Viceroy, where do people go to Article 3? Thank you for jumping in. I'm going to have you back on about Fauci. Where do they go?
Article3project.org, article number 3project.org. Donate, follow us on social. Action items. Let's go get Todd Blanche confirmed right now. Contact both of your home state senators, patch through phone calls, emails, social media posts. Democrat and Republican home state senators, help Republicans find and keep their backbones and rattle the Democrats.
Yeah. Thank you. You know, Fauci had a big-time criminal lawyer, one of these big-time criminal lawyer. I think Fauci and the lawyer are telling us the auto pen pardons are no good. I'll take Fauci's fifth today, calling back for something, but this pardon is no good, and none of them are good. So, Joe Biden's a perverted, demented son ought to think about running his mouth, because I think we ought to go after all of them and indict them all. Mike Davis, thank you so much. Starting with, when you hear Jeff Clark, we're going to indict frickin' Biden for giving away highly classified information. Okay, they're doing a gaggle right now with Rand Paul. Let's hit it.
For monetary awards, and there was a question to monetary awards, he was responding, we have to get to yes on this, and it's not an insignificant amount of money. We're not talking about a $100 award and a dinner certificate. We're talking about $1 million, and not only was he advocating for himself, he was asking others to fill out applications for him to get the $1 million prize. He specifically wanted the money and wanted the waiver. I think it is illegal to use your employees to try to get monetary awards, so yes on that. The other most important thing that came from the diaries is that privately in January 2020, he was already acknowledging that it didn't come from the wet market. Now, that's just dishonest. It may not be a crime, but he knew in January 2020 that the earliest cases did not come from the wet market, they came from somewhere else. But you saw the clips. That was just what we found in about 24 hours. We found maybe 10 different clips of him saying came from the wet market, wet market, wet market. Why is he doing that? It's not just an innocent argument. The wet market points toward being of nature. If it's not from the wet market, it might be from the lab. Who funded the lab? See, he's been self-interested. People, and many won't say who they are, but many in the media treated everything he said as disinterested. He was self-interested from the very beginning. He was self-interested in making sure that nobody could prove it came from the lab.
We're also going to go back. I'm going to tell a story since the war room was on top of it about Barrick at University of North Carolina, and particularly how did Fauci get reversed Obama's policy on gain of function in December of 2017. Oh, yes. We'll go back to the old war and pandemic days, and I will tell you how he did it. This guy ought to rot in prison. Actually, he should be executed, but he should rot in prison. Neil McCabe, you were there. It's so revolting and disgusting to look at that worm and how many people he murdered, how many people died at his hands. The economic destruction, the kids that didn't have junior and senior years of high school, the kids that didn't have junior, senior years of college, all of it. It's absolutely revolting. And to see that worm there trying to hide behind the Fifth Amendment is disgusting. Your thoughts, Neil McCabe?
Yeah, and this isn't something that happened 100 years ago, right? We all lived it, right? It was something that was part of our business, our education. I know people who basically had to drop out of college because they refused to get the vax. In the room, there was tremendous applause when David Schertler, Fauci's attorney, was escorted out. And to his credit, Chairman Rand Paul, he tried to get the guy to just sort of accept that he wasn't recognized and he could not speak. The guy kept going. Rand Paul said, "You're not allowed to sit at the table with Fauci," but he sat there anyway. Rand Paul was ready to roll with that, but the guy it's almost like he intended to get thrown out. Like Roger Clemens, when he didn't have a curveball, would get himself thrown out of a game. That's another story. I thought that the Republicans were very good at hitting Fauci from different angles and laying out a roadmap, because each question is something people can now crowdsource and look up on their own. And these are all of the things that people have questions about. And now what's going to happen is people can now follow this map to sort of dig in themselves into what happened. I thought Josh Hawley was great, talking about the money that Fauci made and how Fauci used his on the federal payroll. We're searching for awards, strong-arming the ethics.
Yeah. Even some of the stiffs were great. They were great today. Neil, also, I want some inside baseball. like Fetterman. But when a lot of Democrats, sized it up and said, I don't want to be on camera. I don't want them to cut a 30-second spot with me defending Fauci or anything. Democrats at one point just headed for the hills, emptied out, and not even going to defend him. Why is that important? Fauci's got no air cover. Even mainstream media, because they're going to watch their culpability in this, and quite frankly, their liability. So you're going to see. By the way, some of the MSNBC crowds are going to come in hard. But today, the big tell for me is that a lot of the Democrats would not even run cover for him, sir.
Well, Gary Peters used his opening statement, the vice chairman, the Democrat from Michigan, who is returning to private life. Peters took his opportunity in his opening statement to basically go after Rand Paul, saying that he was pursuing a personal vendetta. But all the other Democrats refused to ask Fauci any questions because they didn't want to risk him answering a question, which would set up perhaps a legal jeopardy. But of course, John Fetterman, the Democrat from Pennsylvania, he was very tough. He was very honest and sincere. He had a gaggle in the hallway. And as he was talking about his concerns and his disappointment that Dr. Fauci wouldn't answer the questions so we could just find out what happened, two mainstream media reporters tapped their videographers and said, we're out of here. Fetterman's not giving us anything we can use. And so that's where we're at, Steve.
Neil, social media, where did you go to track you down? Great job today.
You can find me on all the socials at Reporter McCabe, Steve.
Thank you, Neil. Appreciate you. Boy, let's go back and pick that scab. Think of the fights we've had here. For the audience have been with us through war of impeachment, pandemic. And this is going after Fauci. And the work that Natalie G. Winters, in fact, I got Natalie doing some clips right now, some of the work she did on investigating this. The weakness of the whole thing, the weakness of 60 Minutes, that just is disgraceful. And after he was shown as a total fraud, to have Biden in that crowd just double and triple down. This ought to get your sense of urgency up. And I realized, people had it and should have done more investigations. I got it. It's not perfect. But the reality is this is going to come back triple if they ever take charge again. This is why they can never be in charge. They can never be in charge. They are Marxist fascist, right? They run like fascists. It's despicable. Also, hey, I'm a simple Mick, but as we explore this the next couple of days and go back and bring up the old evidence, I don't know how, if she's coming over in late September, maybe he brings a checkbook and he's prepared to write a $12 or $15 trillion check of what they owe us. Because now you see the culpability of what happened in Wuhan, the lying about it. Why were they actually working on these gain of functions to basically weaponize? It was not about making vaccines. It's about taking out Trump and the Trump administration, because Trump is the first time that he gotten hammered. And remember, in 2019, after 2 years of diplomacy and negotiations, they ripped up and spat in our face. They ripped up the Lighthizer, Peter Navarro deal that covered their 7 deadly sins and actually started to work them into the global economy. They ripped it up, spit in our face, and then declared a people's war in 19. In that summer, you started to see the beginnings of the military weapon they had, the bioweapon they had. Short commercial break. We'll be back in the war room in just a moment.
Spread the word all through Hong Kong. We will fight till they're all gone. We rejoice when there's no more. Let's take down the CCP.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, I really want to thank our sponsors that have been because of the size of the audience and your intensity and your support, work with us, but clearly on days like that. And Real America's Voice, they've been covering live since 8:30. It's just great, with no commercial breaks. That's the intensity. We want to show you guys living history. And today, the revulsion I hope you had at Tony Fauci, I think it's going to add a lot of energy in the next 98 days, but that later. I want to thank Birch Gold. Go get the End of the Dollar Empire. 9th installment's coming out. I'm working on it right now. It's 8 free installments over, 5 years? When gold was like $1,100 an ounce, I think it was, over $4,000 a day. Actually got higher than that. But find out why it's a hedge. birchgold.com/Bannon, end of the dollar empire. Most important, you get to talk to Philip Patrick and the team. Talk to the experts. Also, the Patriot Mobile team, love them. 972-PATRIOT, call. You'll talk to somebody in an East Texas accent. Maybe after watching Fauci for a couple hours, you guys break into a prayer session. Hey, they're ready for it. It's a Christian company supporting your Christian values. Do it today. Talk to them. Talk to that great customer service team, Jen and Glenn Story over at Patriot Mobile. Talk about why it's the best phone service, I don't know, in the world. Certainly the United States of America. 972-PATRIOT. Do it today. I want to thank the sponsorship. Also, a lot more coming on Texas. I'll be able to talk about that tomorrow. Natalie Dominguez, Home Title Lock. You've got a bombshell for me this morning. You told me about it. My head is still spinning. What do you got for us, ma'am?
So we have an update for the story out of Allegheny County in Pennsylvania. What started off, we thought about 2 weeks ago, was 30 properties that they were looking at. And now we know the count is up to 43. The investigation is still ongoing. But investigators were looking into these properties that were being transferred after the first person that discovered it were going to try to refinance their home. And then the company found out that it was no longer in his name. And someone else, somewhere else, were doing a county property records search and revealed that the deed had been transferred out of their name because they were trying to transfer it to their grandchild, their son or grandson. And all of these things kind of came up in different areas. They had no clue that this was all connected. And they found out by looking at each of these items that someone had taken the information from real notaries, altered the stamps, ordered them on the big online retailer whose name that I can't really say, but it orange and black lettering, and just changed the information and went and filed these with the county. And so they started finding transfer document after transfer document. And they found out that they were moving them into shell LLCs.
Whoa. Slow down. Because they went online and did what?
A lot.
Explain that to me again. Folks, if you don't think in this rudimentary system, you don't think, okay, let me be very simple about this. In modern America, if you're lucky enough to own a home, and if you're under 40, you probably don't. But if you own a home, that home is obviously your castle. It's every dream you've had is in there. However, it also happens to be essentially your retirement program. That is the basic savings of the American people. Social Security, even if it sticks around, is not going to cover you. You know that. It's that net worth. It's the net worth, your equity in that home, which is, I think, on average, 80 or 90% of American people's net worth if you're lucky enough to own a home. The system that protects this is rudimentary. You need tough people, smart people on your side. That's what $1 million triple lock protection gets. But it also gets you in the game for pennies a day to avoid what happened here. What did they do when they went online? Because these people are, first off, with AI and cyber, I don't know how you're going to stop it, right? This is why you need a home title lock. But even without using that, these people are so crafty, so cunning, and so smart. What did they go online and do?
They took real notary stamps that they found of notaries in the area and then had them altered, probably using AI, we don't really know, had them altered and then just ordered. You can order these notary stamps online. That's how notaries get their stamps. And there's no authentication process when you go in to file these at the county. They just make sure it's stamped, it's filled out properly, and it's signed. And so that's how all of this is going through. You mentioned rudimentary protections. The bottom line is there really is no protection. This article, it came out through CBS with all these updates, and the article even says the thing is the homeowners that are going through this already. I think one of them, his name is Richard Self. They've been going through this for like a year, and he finally got his property restored to his name despite the ongoing investigation. But it's a completely separate process. It's all a civil issue that you have to go through. He spent thousands of dollars, and it took months and months and months to get this switched around in his name. So despite this person being found out.
Yeah. For the penalties, you need to remember, the criminal and the civil are two different things.
Yep.
For the pennies it takes a day to get you peace of mind, remember, if this happens to you, your total life changes. Everything that you're focused on, right? And I think it actually ends up killing people because of the rise in blood pressure and just angst and worry. Your entire life focuses on How do I stop this? How do I get my home back? And the money you have to spend, but the opportunity cost, nothing is the same. That once that happens, that's why for pennies a day, and don't take it from me, I need you to contact the people at Home Title Lock and have them walk you through in detail what the $1 million triple lock protection goes. Now, we have the special. You get 2 weeks to try it. But, Natalie, where do people go right now to talk to you and the team? Because the best way the posse does this, they want to immerse themselves, is to contact you guys, go online, get the information. Have any additional questions, Natalie Dominguez and her team are there to answer. Where do they go?
Yeah, you're going to go to HometitleLock.com. We have a great chat function there if you're not feeling chatty and don't want to talk to someone on the phone. But our number's right there on the website. It's on Google. You can also call us, talk to any of the members of our team. We still do have the Steve 25 going on if you want the 25% off up to 2 years. But you can also just use the promo code Steve and you're going to get a 14-day free trial. And you're going to get that title history report to make sure that you're not already a victim. None of these people knew this was going on. They're still finding victims. Don't let yourself fall into that category because there really are no protections. Let us fight for you.
You get a 14-day free trial if you want to sign up for 2 years, 25% off in commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the birth of the greatest nation on earth. Natalie, great job. Love you guys. The audience loves you. Keep protecting people. Protect 90% of your net worth. Got it. Chapter, another freebie with a hotline. I want to make sure you guys take advantage of it. 845 War Room, 845 War Room. Totally free, no obligation. They've saved over $1 million for War Room Posse members. It's Chapter, a data company that'll talk to you about the optimum program for you at Medicare because it's mind-numbingly complex on purpose. So the insurance companies get more fees. 845 War Room, that's Chapter, totally free, no obligation. Charlie Kirk is next. Poso, Gruber, Bowling, back to us at 5. Do not miss it. See you back here then.
We're united, strong and free.